whenever there's a school shooting or something like that, you will assume the perpetrator was crazy. The state assumption.
One of the distancing techniques that people often use when they see some great tragedy, a school shooter, a genocide, Holocaust, something terrible, it's a bit too convenient to say, oh, they were crazy. Only crazy people do that. But biblically speaking, depravity is found in every human heart. And the seeds of evil are planted in all of us. Now, I'm not saying everybody's going to go out and be an axe murderer, but I think there is a chilling reality in that perpetrator is not a whole lot different from you or me. That perpetrator, that school shooter, we're just one or two circumstances away from being in their shoes. Now, that's not supposed to say everybody's about to go do something wild and crazy, but it is supposed to point out to us that we need humility and we need honesty in our politics, in the way we vote, in the way we conduct ourselves in civilization. It's been said that civilization is a thin crust atop of a volcano. And I think that is what Thomas Sowell would call the tragic vision of the conservative. And from a Christian standpoint, when we have depravity in our own hearts, we have to recognize that it's more natural for us to be sinful than to be humanitarian. It's more natural for us to be selfish than for us to be selfless. And recognizing that, we have to step back from that and recognize that school shooter or that genocidal maniac, those things happen in bureaucratic, modern, constitutional societies. People forget that the democides, that is government-based killing, that happened in Russia and in China and under Mussolini in Italy, those happen in constitutional republics, modern governments, and yet hundreds of millions dead. How could that happen? Well, it's because you don't need a whole lot of crazy people to facilitate evil in society. You need compliant masses. And that does happen. That happens all over the place, and I would contend that's happening right now in America because the deadliest act against fellow human beings is ongoing right now, and many of the compliant masses are turning a blind eye, and it's abortion. In the U.S. alone, we've aborted 10 times as many as were killed in the Holocaust already, and it's still counting. And so if we want to look at that school shooter or Hitler or Mussolini or Stalin or Lenin or Mao and say, oh, I could never be like that, they're crazy, recognize that's what we look like plus a few circumstances. And it's there, but by the grace of God, do we not go there?
There was an event here at Dodger Stadium with Joel Osteen. 35,000 people at Dodger Stadium, something like that. He is now the largest quote-unquote church, I'm using the word loosely, in America, down in Houston. You need to understand that he is a pagan religionist in every sense. He's a quasi-pantheist. Jesus is a footnote that satisfies his critics and deceives his followers. The idea of his whole thing is that men have the power in themselves to change their lives. In his definitive book, Your Best Life Now, he says, and that ought to be a dead giveaway, since the only way this could be your best life is if you're going to hell. He says that anyone can create by faith and words the dreams he desires. Health, wealth, happiness, success. The list is always the same. Here's some quotes from his book, Your Best Life Now. If you develop an image of success, health, abundance, joy, peace, happiness, nothing on earth will be able to hold those things from you. End quote. See, that's the law of attraction that's a part of this kind of system. Here's another quote. All of us are born for earthly greatness.
I have four questions for people who are advocates of socialism or communism. Here are the four. There are many other questions we could ask, but here are my four questions. Number one, why do socialistic and communistic countries often build walls to keep people in? Why do they do that? Why did Nikita Khrushchev have to build the Berlin Wall? It wasn't to keep people out of East Berlin. It was to keep people in East Berlin. Secondly, why does the capitalist USA have to build walls to keep people out? Right? We're building walls to keep people out. I mean, we want immigrants, but we want them to come in here legally. We don't want security risks. We don't want people coming in here without us knowing who they are. We don't want people well, some political advocates want people to come in here and feed off the system, even though they don't pay into it. Yeah, we get that. But common sense says you want to know who's in your country. You want to know if there are drains on the country. Are they contributing? Are they paying taxes? Another question. Why are there no migrant caravans going from the USA to Venezuela? It's always the other way around. Why is that? You don't see people knocking doors down to get into socialist countries. They don't risk their lives to do so. Why not? And why would anybody think that's a good idea that we ought to implement here? Why do you think people want to implement socialism here? They might think it's an easier life. It's about equality, right? By the way, what is Marxism all about? What's kind of the central core of Marxism? But why? What needs to be fixed according to Marx, who lived, by the way, in the 1800s? What needed to be fixed? Inequality, because you had an oppressor class and an oppressed class. You had the employers essentially oppressing the employees. He used other language, but that's the simple way of saying it. And the employees were going to rise up and make everything equal. That was the goal, ultimately. And he thought the best way to do that was to go through socialism on into communism. Inequality. We can't have inequality. Now that might sound good on the surface. We'll get into that a little bit later, maybe next week. But that's really the goal. We can't have inequality. And there's oppressor classes and the oppressed classes. In fact, it's really class warfare. That's what Marx is all about. Class warfare. And now there's cultural Marxism, which we'll get into in a future session, where they're trying to say inequality in anything is wrong. Not just financially, but in other ways. So we'll get into that later. My fourth question is, why are you unlikely to ever wash a rental car? You don't own it. Why is public housing not as well kept as private housing? There's something wrong with human nature. If we don't own it, if it's not ours, we're not likely to look after it as well as if it were ours.
Living in crazy times. Biological men are competing and winning against biological women in sports. The newest Supreme Court justice declined to answer the simple question, what is a woman? Record numbers of young Americans now identify as transgender. Sexually explicit materials permeate schools. Pedophiles have rebranded as minor attracted persons. And now, sexual identity and gender ideology advocates have hijacked the civil rights movement, co-opting its success for their own insidious purposes. They have sold the lie that sexual identities are equivalent to race, and that the fight for the rights of sexual minorities is the final frontier in the struggle for civil rights. To make matters even worse, many evangelical leaders eager to appease the culture have gone along to get along, even excusing and redefining sinful behavior as a mere sexual identity. For decades, Christians have been bullied into silence by the false civil rights argument. We've been told that believing marriage is a union between a man and a woman, that there are only two genders, and that they, them, are plural pronouns, makes us bigots, Nazis, and hate-filled monsters. But what if they're wrong? What if it's not like being black?